Hello, welcome back to Cracking the Cryptic, where today we're going to take a look at another different type of puzzle, and this one has come in from Charles by email, and he says it's called Nanro Signpost. It sounds like another Japanese puzzle. I did a quick look on the internet for it. I found a few examples. There's a couple over at gmpuzzles.com, which is a good puzzle site, worth having a look at. Yeah, I thought we would have a look at it. Now, because I've never seen this puzzle ever before, I have looked at a couple of the examples. So we're going to work through 3 puzzles today. The first 2 I have done before. Hands up, these are not going to be live solves for the first 2 puzzles. The third puzzle I haven't done before, and that's the biggest puzzle. So, that will be live. Right, let's talk about the rules of this puzzle. So let me read them out. Label some cells with numbers to form a single connected group of labelled cells. No 2x2 group of cells may be fully labelled. Each number must be equal to the total count of labelled cells in that bold region, and all bold regions contain at least 1 labelled cell. The given numbers indicate how many cells are labelled in that region, but not necessarily which cells are labelled. And when 2 numbers are orthogonally adjacent across a region boundary, those numbers must be different. Right, so perhaps the best way of deciphering that amount of text is to look at an example. So this is a very simple 6x6 puzzle, but it illustrates some of the principles involved. So how would we go about solving this? Let's look at these 2 groups of 3 here. So we know that if this square, for example, did contain a 3, then because we can't have 2 orthogonally connected cells across boundaries that have the same number, this cell would not be a 3. But obviously both of these areas are just 2x2 areas, and they must contain 3 cells labelled 3. So you can immediately see it's not possible that we put both of these cells labelled 3. We then couldn't put numbers in those 2 cells, and this square would break. So we know that exactly one of these 2 yellow cells is going to be highlighted. Now, what does that mean? Well, if exactly one of these 2 cells is highlighted, those 2 cells must definitely be 3s, and vice versa, those must be 3s on that side. Now, because we know that 3s can't be orthogonally connected to one another across a boundary, now none of those squares can be 3s. So I'm going to use red to indicate where cells definitely don't contain a number. Now, looking at this region now, this 3 region, there are only 3 cells left that could possibly contain 3s, so they must all be 3s. And now we come to our second key condition, which is that all white cells must be orthogonally connected to one another. So if we made this square red, this little group here wouldn't be connected to their friends. So we know this square is definitely a number, and because it's in a 2 box, that number must be a 2. Now we can extrapolate this slightly. I mean, if the other cell in this 2x2 group was this one, then because this box is a 1, we could put a 1 here, but this area would be completely broken off from the rest of the puzzle. So we know this square, in fact, definitely is not a 2. And therefore, again, to connect this, that means that's going to have to come up. We now know this square must be a 3, because if it's not, all of the red cells connect to one another, and again they isolate the white area. So this is a 3 here. If this is a 3, this can't be a 3. So that's going to be a 3. And look at the way this puzzle starts to build up. And I found this in the 2 examples I've done. It really is quite a beautiful puzzle. So now, what could we say about this? We know this square must be a number, and we need to work out what that number is. And we also know that whatever we put in here, it's got to somehow bridge across to this side of the grid to reach these squares. And in doing that, it's going to have to use this 2 square somehow. And this is really cool because now we can see, I think it's not too difficult to see, that as we need this bridge to happen, either these 2 squares must be in, or these 2 squares must be in. But if it's these top 2 squares, then there's no way of filling this box. Because, let me show you completely, if these 2 squares were 2's, I need to put a number in here. And I need it to connect to this cell orthogonally. So I can't use 2 because this can't connect to another 2 across a region boundary. If I make this a 3, it breaks the boundary there. If I make this a 4, we'd have a 2 by 2 area of numbers, which is not allowed under the rules. So the only possibility would be to have a 1 in this square, and then it wouldn't connect to these 2's. So these 2's are not the bridge. Those 2 squares are not in. These 2 squares must be the bridge. And now this square must be a 1. And that creates the cut across here, look. All these squares are now red. This, if we made that square a number, this would be a 2 by 2 set. So that's red. Now this area's got 5 digits left to place, and we need 4 numbers in it labelled 4. So you can see this square, for example, must be in, because if it's not, this one will become isolated. So we can definitely put all of these squares in. That gives us a potential 2 by 2 problem here. So this square must be red. That makes this one 4, and that a 1, and that completes the puzzle. So that's just the example. So you can see how this is going to be quite interesting. Okay, so here's a bigger example. Now I have done this one before, but I think it'll be good practice. I thought this was another beautiful puzzle. So let's think about how we would do this one. You can see there's a couple of easy givens here, because an area that's 3 cells large that contains a 3, well, all of those squares must be 3. This square can't be in because that would create a 2 by 2 area. This square needs to contain a number because every region needs to contain a number. So the only number I could legitimately put in there is a 1. If I put a 2 in there, I would need another cell to put another 2 in. That's obviously not right. So actually there's a few squares we can fill in that must contain 1's. This 3, and this 3 have all got to be 3's because they're all 3 squares large. This square has to be red because of the 2 by 2 rule. This square can't be in because if it was, we'd have a 3 crossing a region boundary, so that's not in, which leaves just 3 squares to be in there. Now neither of these 2 squares can be a 1 because that would connect to another 1 orthogonally, so both of these squares must be 2. That means this square is red because otherwise we've got a 2 by 2 problem. Oh, okay, and now look at these 3's. So we can't actually, in this central 3 by 3, none of these squares can be in, because if they are, we'd have 3's connected across a boundary, which we know is not possible. And this square can't be in because that would be connected across a boundary. That only leaves 3 squares in that area open. And look, this 3 now, that forces that one to be red, which again allows us to enter more 3's. This square must be red, otherwise we breach the 2 by 2 problem. And can you see how again the setter of this puzzle is setting up these areas where we have to be very careful to make sure everything connects to each other. So now these 2 squares must both be in, otherwise this area will be isolated. Therefore these 2 squares are 2. Neither of those squares can contain a 3. Okay, that's beautiful. And again, this area here needs to connect to some friends, so that square is going to have to be in. Don't yet know what number that's going to be. Ah, okay, but look, I can put some more red numbers in there because this box has a 3 in it. Right, okay, and now I can see the finish, because now to connect this big white area at the bottom to the areas at the top of the grid, we have to go through this little passageway here. So clearly, this square and this square and this square and this square must all contain digits. Well, we can see those two squares, because they're in boxes with 3s in, they've got to contain 3s. And we know these two squares are in. If we put that square in as well, we'd have 3 cells in this area. All of them therefore would have to be labelled 3. That's not going to work. So in fact those two must be labelled 2. This must be red. All of those squares must be labelled 3, and then we need this to connect to this. There's only one cell that allows that to happen. That's that one. Isn't it clever how these puzzles work? I really love it. And then again we have to build a bridge here. That's going to be a... And now we're just left with this area at the top where we have to put a number into these. We can't put 1 into there because that's going to break with this 1. So we must put 2. And I think that works. Everything is connected. There's no 2 by 2 areas. Absolutely brilliant. Right, so now we come to the magnum opus.